Welcome. You are listening to Haunted Histories on Paranormal UK Radio.
A very warm welcome to all of you tuning in to listen to this episode of Haunted Histories on Paranormal UK Radio with yours truly, the history hostess with the haunted mostess, Penny Griffiths-Morgan. Now, one of the there's many plus points doing this show for me personally, but one of them is that no two shows are the same. Every time I'm looking into a new episode of Haunted Histories, the research I get to do every single time is a bit different, which for someone who's a real sort of knowledge junkie, like I am, it's amazing and I love it. And this week is exactly like that. It's something I've never really looked into. And to say I have had a ball researching this, even though it's not a particularly nice subject we're talking about, but I've had an absolute party looking into all of this. It's been great. Now, my guest I'm going to be talking to tonight, I was introduced to her by one of her closest friends, one of her best friends, the wonderful Miranda Young of Ghost Biker Explorations, who you probably remember was on Haunted Histories last year when we talked about Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary. And wonderful show. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, go back. Once you finish listening to this one, no jumping around here, go back and have a listen to that one because it was fascinating. Now, when my guest for tonight told me about the location that we're going to be talking about, I knew I had to get her on the show. It just appealed to me in every sense possible. And I want to say that if you mention 1930s gangsters to anyone, and I tried this with a few people this week, you get people like Bonnie and Clyde mentioned or Al Capone. They seem to be synonymous with the era. But there were so many, many more. And they had names like John Dillinger, Machine Gun Kelly, Pretty Boy Floyd, Babyface Nelson. But I'm actually going to be talking about those particular ones. On this episode, I'm going to be talking about Ma Barker of the Barker Karpis gang. And my guest is the absolutely wonderful Kristy Sumner of Soul Sisters Paranormal. Hi, Kristy. How are you?
I'm doing well, Penny. Thank you for having me tonight.
I really am looking forward to this. I'm genuinely really looking forward to this because it's been absolutely fascinating doing the research. Some of the stuff I've found, I never knew. And that's always good for someone who's a bit of a knowledge hound.
It is a fascinating story, and when you look at it behind the historical context as well as the social context of what was going on during that time period, you just really delve into a lot of factors, which, like you, I find fascinating. Yeah,
definitely. So, you and I sort of touched base. It was Miranda who put us in touch, wasn't it? I mean, I think she did my show last year, and she was saying, you got to get Kristy on. You'll love talking to her. And I was like, okay, yeah, always love to find new people. And I think when I messaged and you said, oh, what about this house now I've got to see if I can pronounce this place right. Ocklawaha.
Very good. Yes.
Is that okay?
Ocklawaha, Florida.
Yeah. I can't say it as fast as you. Yeah. I was trying to pronounce it to someone. I was like, Ocklawaha. And then you mentioned Ma Barker. And if I call her Ma Baker by accident, that is all Boney M's fault for their song Ma Baker, which my husband had never heard. And I played it to him the other night and he was actually tapping his foot. And then I said, but now listen to the lyrics. And it's not as nice as it sounds when you listen to the lyrics. And I think it is a little bit inaccurate as well at times. But So if anyone hears me call a Baker instead of Barker, it's their fault. But you mentioned this house, and you said it's where, in effect, her last stand was, for want of a better term. And I thought, that's perfect. That's perfect. And then you and I started to get to know each other. And I found out some things about you, which I was incredibly blown away by. Firstly, I mean, you and I have got to be friends because you've got 4 golden retriever dogs who are...
Absolutely.
Who I love when you put pictures of them up. It just gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling inside because they're beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. You're also a biker.
Yes.
Like Miranda. You and her go on runs quite a lot together.
We do.
You're also incredibly intelligent in that you're actually a doctor, a PhD in public affairs. And then
Correct.
I was watching one of your videos and I got quite confused and I was like, how can she be there and be there as well? And I messaged Miranda and I said, how did she edit it to be in 2 separate places? And she thought that was hilarious. Because then she pointed out to me, you've got a twin.
I've got a twin sister, yes.
Who's also part of Soul Sisters Paranormal and also has the same PhD as you.
Correct, yes. So we're co-founders of Soul Sisters Paranormal, and we're twins, and we're best friends, and it's just been an amazing ride to be able to do this with my sister.
I can bet. Is she a biker as well?
She is. She's not as prolific as Miranda and I. She does have her motorcycle license, though, and she has a Harley.
Wow, so it was kind of what they about twins being similar and similar interests and similar, not just physically.
We do have similar interests. She's a little bit more, I would say studious than I am. I was more the sports minded,
right.
And where she tended more to be of the academic type. But we shared the similar interest in motorcycles and paranormal activity and paranormal investigations. But we are very close, but we have our individual lives for sure.
Yeah. Is she a dog lover too?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, that's all right then. That's all right. She's in my good books then.
Okay.
You gotta love your animals, haven't you? You gotta love your animals.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the Ma Barker, the Barkers. When I started looking into them, and I realised they weren't actually from Florida originally. She was Missouri.
Correct.
From Missouri, and then you get even more confusing because she's known as Kate Barker, but that's not her real name.
Correct. Well, Kate is one of her names. She was actually born Arizona Donnie Kate Clark in 1873.
And when I saw that her nickname was Ari for Arizona, when I was first reading about her, I thought, oh, is she from Arizona then? I wondered if that's why she was nicknamed that and her name was Kate. But no, it was, she's as you say, she was born Arizona Clark in Missouri. Quite a poor upbringing. I think one account I read recently said she would probably have been modern day trailer trash if that had existed back in the 1800s.
That's an accurate description.
Is it? Okay. But the thing is, so many of these gangsters seem to have come out of Missouri or been linked to Missouri when I started looking into them.
A lot of the Midwest states really were breeding grounds, if you will, for gangsters, for organized criminals. You really have to kind of go back again to the society at that point. As these were coming into existence to be really prolific, you've got the prohibition in 1920 to 1933, and then you've got the Great Depression from 1929 to 1935. So when you couple that with what's going on in just society as a whole, then the Midwest really does give rise to organized criminals as well as gangsters during this time.
Definitely. I mean, I wrote a piece about, it's sort of coming off the point a bit, but I wrote a piece about the female gangster Vivian Chase. She was Missouri. And there was another one that I was looking up. Was it Dillinger? I can't remember now off the top of my head. But yeah, it just seemed to be Missouri, and especially St. Louis seemed to be the hub for so many of them. Well,
again, when you really start delving into the history, you find that because Prohibition really allowed these underground, back alley type of deals to be made, there was also a lot of money being made during that time. So you've got these gangsters, these organized criminals that are making money hand over fist during Prohibition, and law enforcement really wanted a piece of that as well. So in addition to the the back alley deals, you've got law enforcement saying, well, we want a piece of that. And so if you fund our pockets, we're going to turn a blind eye to that. Yeah. So St. Paul in Missouri and all of that, they definitely have, they definitely allowed it to flourish because there was no law enforcement stopping it, really. They were actually a part of it.
Wow. Well, so I'll call her Kate because it's easiest, but Ari, as she would have been back then, she got married at 19 at a very young age. But even before that, her sort of, and I think this is quite important for where she ended up, shall we say, her glamorization of gangs and villains was quite evident in that Jesse James, one of her heroes, and supposedly she hiked to see him through the town near where she was. And I think it was the Dalton gang, when they were taken down, she actually cried. She was upset. And it's that kind of glamorizing the whole gangster type lifestyle, I suppose. I suppose if she'd grown up in such a sort of a poor environment, seeing the gangsters living there, as she would, as a child, would probably thought a glamorous lifestyle, not necessarily cognizant of, if you like, the danger and the risk.
Well, and you're correct. She did glamorize those, but that wasn't unusual. A lot of people were glamorizing these gangsters at the time because they were really doing things that were brazen. They were doing things that others wanted to emulate, honestly. So it wasn't unusual for people to glamorize Bonnie and Clyde. It's when they actually started taking lives. So, for example, when the Barker Karpis gang killed Sheriff Kelly there in Missouri, that's when the public really turned against them. But before that, and to your point about Kate Barker, she really did come up from nothing. She really wanted a lifestyle that was more glamorous. She thought that when she married George in 1892, that she was going to get that life with him, but he was more content to be a homebody. Yeah. And so that's why she relied on her sons after that to really give her the lifestyle that she wanted, that she glamorized through the gangster, lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so as you said, she married George, who sort of was never going to be a big hitter in sort of with finances and stuff. They were still dirt poor, mud shack type existence. She had Herman at 20 years old. Then 4 years later, Lloyd came along. A couple of years after that, Arthur, who was known as Doc, came along, and then Fred comes along. So you've got this very young woman, in my eyes, with 4 children. A husband who, well, it depends how you read about him, doesn't it? Some people say he was a lazy, sort of didn't do anything, whereas I've checked some of the census records. He always had a job. But he just wasn't sort of giving her the big life that maybe she lusted after. But the boys, according to their school reports, weren't academic. They were almost illiterate. Which I guess wouldn't have been that unusual for the early 1900s because schooling wasn't as fastidious as it is now. It was in, I think, 1910 when Herman's, the eldest, at 16, 17, his criminal career sort of took off, didn't it? When he ran over a child, getaway car.
Correct. So, they did start, as you said, in a very young age. And Ma, we'll call her Ma, she, because that's what the boys called her. She really advocated their criminal lifestyle. She would go before the courts and say, my child's not that bad, give him another chance. Yeah. So she really encouraged that behavior instead of disciplining them. She encouraged this criminal behavior.
Yeah, I think it was we were saying off air that I said to you that she seemed to me like a very overprotective mother of these boys, that as far as she concerned, whatever they did, they could do no wrong. And she would, I read accounts of her sort of refusing to leave one of the courthouses until they released one of her sons.
Correct.
In the end, they just gave up because they just couldn't cope with her haranguing them as much as she was to release her sons. And I know for me personally, I've got 2 sons, and if one of them hit a child whilst trying to get away from a burglary, there's no way I'd be haranguing the courts to let him out. I'd probably be saying, teach him a lesson. This is, I didn't raise him like this, sort of thing. But Yeah, it's an amazing sort of it's sort of doing the research on her, and there's a reason I'm talking about all this. It's to me, it's almost like she was this very, very naive mother figure, because in 1927, it was Herman who died in 1927, wasn't it? Yeah, 1927, Herman died when he'd shot is that when he shot the sheriff point blank?
Correct.
Face?
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. So he was actually running from the law, and he decided to go ahead and take his own life rather than being caught by law enforcement.
Yeah, he crashed his car, didn't he, and then shot himself before they could pull him. Even though he had been shot anyway, he deliberately killed himself so he couldn't be caught. So, that's her eldest son gone. But Lloyd, who was the second one, now he's the one that fascinates me the most, if I'm honest, because he's the one who he seemed to almost want to be conventional. I mean, he served in World War One, didn't he?
He did.
He ended up in Leavenworth. I can't remember what for. You probably know. He did end up in Leavenworth. So when a lot of the stuff was going on in the sort of 20s and 30s, he was actually incarcerated anyway.
Correct.
And we'll talk about what happened to him after his mother died, because I was actually I felt really sorry for him when I found out what happened to him, because he did seem to want to almost go straight.
Correct. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And then you've got Doc. Now, Doc seemed to be the brains, from what I can see, of the whole operation. He did seem to be the one, Arthur, known as Doc. He seemed to be, What do you think about?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So he was the one that, by all accounts, did a lot of the planning, along with Fred and Alvin Karpis, of planning the robberies, planning where they were going to hit next, what their routes would be. So I would say of the four of them, that he definitely had the smarts of the group, for as much as that means. Of those four, he had the smarts of the group. Yeah.
So you've got this whole sort of timeline that I'm trying to go through that, making it sound too boring for people listening. So in 1928, we've got George has gone. Her husband, he's gone. He's had enough. I think Herman dying was really the straw that broke the camel's back and all that kind of thing. You've got Lloyd's in Leavenworth. You've got Doc's in Oklahoma State Prison. You've got Fred's in Kansas State Prison. And by 1930, Kate is now with a chap called Arthur Dunlap.
Dunlap, correct.
Sometimes known. Kate also started developing a reputation for enjoying male company, I suppose.
Yes, she had several paramours during this time, correct.
I hate it when I read that about women, because it's like, well, it's all right for a man to do that, but why is it not all right for the woman to do that if she wants a bloke? I try and say she was bucking the trend, I suppose, for the how you were supposed to be as a woman back then. But anyway, and Fred gets out of prison and he's palled up with the chap you mentioned, Alvin.
Right. So he gets out of prison in about 1927. And so, but in prison, he met up with Alvin Karpis, and Alvin Karpis, he was already a gangster in his own right. He had really kind of made a name for himself in that scene as being a bank robber and being one that could really strong arm people as well. So, and by all accounts, he was actually very bright also. So he and Fred met up again in 1927, and that's when they decided to actually form the Barker Karpis gang.
Well, but Alvin's nickname was Creepy Karpis, wasn't it?
Correct. Yeah, he was Creepy Karpis because he had this way of
nicknames.
He had a way of just staring at you that just really made you kind of feel quote unquote creeped out. So his nickname became Creepy Karpis.
But even if you look at the mugshots of him, you kind of get that. Ooh, it's not a sort of even the mugshot stare is quite sort of.
It's an interesting look.
Yeah, I'm trying to analyze it, but it's
you kind of wonder what is going on behind those eyes. What's he thinking?
Yeah. So, they're going on this whole thing. They do two big kidnaps in the 1930s. One William Ham, another one Edward Bremer, I'm not sure how you pronounce it.
Yeah, Edward Bremer. So just to kind of digress just a little bit, Penny, just to kind of set the stage a little bit more for your audience.
Sure.
As you said before, you've got Alvin Karpis and Fred, who have met in 1927, and they formed the Barker Karpis gang. But you do have to kind of go back and look again at that social context, because here in the States, there was really no federal law enforcement presence at the time. There was the Bureau of Investigation, but they really had no teeth, if you will. So when you've got these bank robbers that are moving from state to state, they're essentially going from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And so local law enforcement really had no pull to go after them once they robbed the bank and then they crossed state lines. And so then in 1931, when they kill Sheriff Kelly in Missouri, that's when they really start to get on the radar of being quote unquote bad guys. That's when the disillusion really started happening with the public, because until then, the Barker Karpis gang was glorified as this great gang. So then you've got J. Edgar Hoover, who is head of the Bureau of Investigation in around 1921, and he really tried to come in and standardize law enforcement, and so the federal law enforcement. And so then also coupling that with the Charles Lindbergh kidnapping in 1932, which really put kidnapping on a federal level, and it really brought that to the attention of everybody in the country. And so now you've got in 1932, you've got the Charles Lindbergh law, which makes kidnapping a federal offense if you take that person across state lines. Wow. So to get to your point of the kidnappings, in 1933, the Barker Karpis gang really wanted to elevate itself, and because the bank robberies were only netting them about $2,000 to $5,000 a bank robbery, and they really wanted a higher stake than that. So in 1933, they kidnapped William Ham Jr., who was a prosperous brewer, and they took him from Minnesota to Wisconsin, which now made that a federal crime because they crossed state lines. And so they asked for $100,000 ransom, and they were able to get that. But what it did is it put J. Edgar Hoover on their tails now. So then in 1934, they escalated to William Bremer, who was a friend actually of the president at the time. So they kidnapped Edward Bremer. They got $200,000 ransom for him. And then the president told J. Edgar Hoover, go get these guys. And that's when the federal law enforcement really started tailing them and trying to take down the Barker Karpis gang.
And they became public enemy number one.
Correct.
Because we don't have that term in this country. I mean, there's a rap band, I think, that was called Public Enemy. There's been films Public Enemy, and for those listening who are not from America and have not heard the term, it is literally, it's almost like an FBI hit list, isn't it? Wanted list. People they feel is the most dangerous enemy to the public, and they did become Public Enemy number one. And I also noticed when I was researching a lot of the gangs, the whole kidnapping thing, a lot of them started to seem to do the kidnapping. And thinking about it now, from you were saying about Lindbergh, it was post 1932. A lot of them suddenly seemed to start doing it as a method of, it seemed to be the progression. You'd start off almost with small drugstores, like robbing the tills. Then you'd go into bank robbery, and then you'd go into kidnap. And looking at it, it does seem to be, I'm not talking necessarily about your Al Capones and your big massacre type ones, but I'm talking about the smaller sort of gangsters that I was reading about. As you say, that this puts them on the map. Now, do you think that because society in America was struggling in the 1930s? I'm not trying to be sort of sarcastic or anything. It was. You had
it really was, correct.
Depression. There was people who there was suicides because people couldn't feed their families. People were I read one case where someone was actually boiling leather to try and make a soup out of it. I mean, some of the things I've read, it absolutely belies belief what they were having to do to try and make ends meet.
Oh yeah, it was destitute.
See that the public not have an issue with a lot of these gangs like shooting a respected sheriff and all that. When they saw them stealing from the banks, was it almost like a Robin Hood type thing? They were stealing from the rich to give to the poor. Is that why they kind of accepted it and didn't shop them?
Well, essentially, yes, there was this glorification of the gangsters of the time because of that. They were essentially it was an escape from the everyday. When you're reading about depression and, your neighbor can't feed his family or anything like that, but then you start reading about these escapades of gangsters that are crossing state lines and they're having shootouts with police and they're, in getaway cars and stuff. I think it was almost like, for lack of a better term, their Hollywood of the time.
Yeah.
It allowed them that escapism from their everyday drudgery of what they were actually experiencing in life.
Yeah.
But after they started killing, everybody still had that strong moral compass of right and wrong.
Yeah.
And so when they escalated to killing Sheriff Kelly in 1931, that's when they had the public really start turning against them, which is something that they hadn't experienced before.
Yeah.
They really, they had essentially the public's backing, if you will, but when they turned to murder, the public just couldn't condone that. And that's when they started really getting turned on by the average Joe.
Yeah. Which I have read accounts that there was one account I read that one of the houses they were staying in, and this was before they got to Ocklawaha, but another one that they were staying in, they'd always stay under a fake name, an assumed name, so people wouldn't know that they were the Barkers. Ma would normally say that any other lads who were joining them, whether it be Karpis or another one, was her nephew or their, a cousin, a nephew, that kind of thing. Her boyfriend, Dunlap, whatever you want to call him, he was found dead. Some say that she ordered the hit. Some say it was Doc. Who knows? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, but apparently he was getting a bit sort of demanding and a bit...
He was getting a little mouthy.
That's the other thing I was going to say.
Arthur Dunlap was getting a little bit mouthy, and he had a drinking problem. So when he would drink, he'd get the loose lips. Yeah. And so by the accounts that I've read, it was Doc that ordered him to be taken out because they just couldn't risk him going to the cops or telling the wrong person who would go to the cops and really expose the gang. So, so he was actually taken out. And again, it's just that progression, that escalation of violence that we talked about earlier. In my mind, they really did get full of themselves. They thought they started to think that they were invincible. And so that progression from petty bank robberies to murder to kidnapping, you really see that progression very clearly with the Barker Karpis gang.
Yeah. Definitely. I saw that as I wrote the timeline down. So they've stayed in a few different places. There's always someone tips them off when they've been, because they started becoming more well known. And even though obviously we didn't have, there wasn't the kind of media that we have now. You didn't have the internet, you didn't have social media, you didn't have world news. Even like things like America didn't. When did America get VICAP? Can't remember when. That was quite relatively recently, wasn't it? You got your computer systems so that you knew what was going on in different states, so that you could keep in touch. But there was almost like a comic book that you could have that would have some of the crimes that have been committed. And I know I read in one account that one of the places they stayed, the neighbours would say how lovely they were as a family, and that they, you'd think they'd want to keep themselves to themselves, but they didn't. They really sort of made themselves part of the community. And someone said Ma was really generous, and if someone needed a new jumper, she would get them a jumper. If someone had no food, she'd come around with a massive casserole, all that kind of thing. And that really is hard when you've got to think, well, no, she's a baddie. She's the bad guy here. But you're thinking, well, she's actually been quite caring as well.
They did try to blend in with the community to the extent that they wanted to be part of the community in some of these locations, but they did flaunt their wealth.
Yes.
When we get to the part about how they ended up in Ocklawaha, they started renting this house for an exorbitant amount for the time. And so they were very they were not shy about flaunting the fact that they had money. But to your point, they did go into town, they did go grocery shopping, they did socialize with the community in the locations that they were staying.
Yeah, but they always got tipped off before the police arrived, which is, you were saying about there was an awful lot of corrupt law enforcement back then. I think I read that about 3 or 4 years, I think it was 5 years after Ma and Fred died. Sorry, that might be a spoiler for people who don't realise, but yes, they did actually die. Loads of police officers were arrested and sent to prison because they were found to have been aiding and abetting them to let them keep getting away. But anyway, so tell the story of how they ended up in Florida, how they ended up in Go on.
Okay, so we've got two different storylines going on first. So in 1932, in Ocklawaha, Florida, which is a small town in central Florida, and there was a gentleman by the name of Carson Bradford, and he decided that he wanted to build a very extravagant vacation home for his family. He was from Miami. He made his money in the entertainment business, amusement parks and such. So he built this house, this vacation home by a lake called Lake Weir. And, he would bring his families up for the summer. And so it was built to the highest standards of the time. It had large bedrooms. It had a couple of bathrooms. It had a large front porch, which was screened in, which is crucial in Florida. And so that is this one storyline. Okay, so he has this house going on over here. So then as we said before, in 1933, the Barker Karpis gang has kidnapped William Ham Jr. They got $100,000 ransom for him. And then in 1934, they ended up kidnapping Edward Bremer, and they got $200,000 ransom for the return of Bremer. So they returned Bremer, and because Bremer was friends with the president at the time, the president ordered J. Edgar Hoover to go after the Barker Karpis gang and go after them hard. Mm-hmm. So the gang split up. And Doc Barker went to Chicago, and he rented an apartment there, and he had some other gangsters that were staying in this apartment with him. But Ma and Fred went down to Ocklawaha, Florida, and they had a realtor friend in the location, and he said, well, why don't you rent this house from Carson Bradford? Now, it was not set up as a rental house. It was Carson Bradford's vacation home. Mm-hmm. But other rentals in the area were going for about $7 to $15 a month, and they offered Carson Bradford $100 a month to rent this vacation home. And he agreed to do that. He didn't tell his wife. He just agreed to do that. Not knowing who he rented the house to. Yeah. So Ma and Fred rented the house under the name of T.C. Blackburn. That was their alias. And to your point, all accounts, they were going into Ocala, which was the next big town, and they were spending money. People knew them as the Blackburns, great neighbors, great people in the community. So they were kind of living this high life down here in Central Florida. Meanwhile, you've got Doc in Chicago, and the FBI has started tracking him specifically. So on January 8th of 1935, the FBI found Doc. They raided his apartment, and they started shuffling through all these papers. And they came across a letter that was written by Ma Barker. And the letter referenced this hideout in Central Florida, and it referenced the fact that Doc's brother Fred was hunting an alligator named Big Joe. Mm-hmm. He would go out and try to find this alligator. And so the FBI took that letter, and they came down here to Florida, and they started talking to alligator trappers in the area and said, where is there a lake that has an alligator named Big Joe? And the trappers pointed the FBI in the direction of Lake Weir. So the FBI agents, January 9th and 10th, descended on Central Florida, and they started doing a stakeout around Ocklawaha, Florida. And they got visual identification of Ma and Fred as being T.C. Blackburn, the alias of T.C. Blackburn. So on the morning of January 16th, 1935, the FBI agents surrounded this vacation home where they were staying, and they ordered the occupants to come out, and nothing happened. So they fired a tear gas canister at the side of the house into the window, but it missed the window and it hit the side of the house. And so at that point, there was a scream from inside, and gunfire erupted from the house. So the agents returned fire. And it ended up being about a 4.5-hour gun battle between the two sides. About 2,000 rounds were fired between the two sides. And it culminated with Ma and Fred being killed inside this house.
Yeah. It started at about 5:30 in the morning, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm, correct.
Something along those lines. And I read some eyewitness accounts from people who lived nearby as well, who said it was... they were even getting shot at when they were trying to run for cover and all of that. It's one of those things that it's hard to fathom, even though we know it happened. There's enough reports. Now, we're going to get to the house in a second. I just want to mention what happened to the other two brothers. So ends up in Alcatraz. the infamous Alcatraz,
Yes.
which I have been lucky enough to visit. And
I love Alcatraz. Yes.
Yeah. I actually didn't find it that scary. Maybe it was different if it was in the middle of sort of a cold night and everything else. I actually thought it was quite peaceful. But he got shot trying to escape Alcatraz. Mm-hmm. In fact, Karpis ended up in Alcatraz, didn't he?
Right.
And wasn't he the longest resident ever there, or something along those lines?
Correct. So he served 27 years. And so after Ma and Fred were killed, obviously they still had to contend with Karpis. So to your point earlier, he actually became public enemy number one. Yeah. And he was the only public enemy number one to actually be taken alive. The others were killed by the FBI. Yeah. So they were able to track him down about 6 months after the shootout in Ocklawaha. And they did arrest him. He was charged with 14 counts of murder, and he did serve 27 years in Alcatraz, which was the longest serving. And then he was paroled. And he actually, the funny, ironic part is he actually ended up dying in Spain in 1979, and he was a free man when he did so, which is one of the most prolific gangsters of our time. He actually ended up being a free man at the end.
It is amazing, isn't it? But they actually paroled a lot of them that left Alcatraz when it shut for some reason. I don't know why. But anyway, so he was in Alcatraz as well. But Doc tried to escape, got shot. In the meantime, we've got Lloyd, who everyone's forgotten about. He's a free man. He ends up serving in the American Army in World War II.
Correct.
Ironically, as a cook in a prisoner of war camp, which is quite... ironic.
It is,
considering his background. He is honorably discharged with a good conduct medal. And you have to think that had he been born into another family, I wonder if he would never have got into trouble. He does seem to be the one who really wanted, but his family almost kept pulling him back. But I found so, and I shouldn't have laughed then, but I found so tragic was he died in 1949. And think, what happened? Did he was in his, 50, 51. Did he have a heart attack? Did he get hit by a car? Did he turn to crime and get shot? No. He was murdered by his wife, who ended up in a mental health facility, I believe, for the rest of her life in Colorado.
Correct. Yeah, he was in Westminster, Colorado, and he came home one afternoon from working, and he opened the door, and she was standing there with a shotgun, and actually just blew him away at that point. Yeah,
they had 2 children together. She'd been married, I think she had 2 children by her first husband. She was about 13, 14 years younger than him, but they think that maybe she was suffering some kind of postnatal depression. The next one up from that. Psychosis, postnatal, postpartum psychosis, because she was adamant he was going to kill her. Although there's no evidence to that effect. And even his work colleagues said they were really shocked when they found out who it was, because he never gave any clue that he belonged to an infamous crime family. And I just think it's such a tragic end for the one who did seem to try and go straight. And it's almost like it was destiny that all of them were going to die in a hail of bullets.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It is extremely sad and extremely ironic, but I've always thought the same thing. It was almost kind of like his destiny that he was supposed to die that way.
Yeah. And George, Dad, really knows what happened to him. All they know is that he was constantly scared, because he was still in touch with his sons, I believe, and the ones he was surviving at the time. Apparently he was always scared that one of them would come after him because he knew too much.
Correct. Yeah, he really disassociated himself with the family during their crime spree. The interesting thing is, after Ma and Fred were killed there in 1935, the police did question George. They ascertained that he knew nothing about what was going on, had no involvement with the gang at all, and they actually asked him to come to Florida and take control of the bodies, and he refused. So the bodies of Ma and Fred Barker actually sat in a morgue for about 8 months before finally George reluctantly agreed made to grab their bodies and take them back to Oklahoma. And I think the most ironic part of this story is, the Barker Karpis gang, they were able to amass more money than all of the other gangs combined during that time. And they, except for Herman, all of them are buried in a pauper's grave in Oklahoma. And so it's a very interesting end to that saga. They could have taken that money and lived the high life and really enjoyed it, but they decided to go down in a blaze of glory.
But the money that the FBI found in the house that they couldn't attribute to any particular robbery or whatever, guess who got it?
Yeah, correct. So the bulk of the bulk of the $200,000 ransom that they got for Bremer, they have no idea where it is. A lot of people thought that they had buried it under the house. There was extensive excavations done. They could not find the bulk of that money anywhere. So what they think was happening was that because Florida is so close to Cuba, that the gang members would come to the Ocklawaha house. They would take the money and they would take it back to Cuba to get quote unquote clean money, and then they would bring it back to the States and distribute it that way throughout the gang.
But I just read that he took ownership of the money that was found in that. I just found that quite sort of oh dear, maybe he wasn't as stupid with money as Ma thought. So anyone wondering what you're listening to Haunted Histories on Paranormal UK Radio. My guest is the lovely Kristy Sumner of Soul Sisters Paranormal, and we're talking about Ma Barker. Now, we've talked about the history of it. We've talked about what happened. We've touched a little bit on the house. And if you want to have a look at what it's like, there's quite a few videos on YouTube, but Soul Sisters do have their own YouTube channel, and there's some great investigations on there. And one of the things I like about their videos, and I've watched a few, is you don't just do there was a knock here, there was a bang there, there was needed. You build up, you paint the picture of the place, you talk about the history, you talk about that it's not a Hollywoodized investigation. I'm trying to put it as politely as possible.
Well, thank you for saying that. Correct.
Yes. If you go on the YouTube channel and subscribe to it, please do subscribe to it, because the video, I was looking at the video on Ma Barker's house today, and you're nudging 40,000 views on that video.
Yes, ma'am.
That's amazing, and it's such an interesting. It is such an interesting video to watch. So you can get, by watching that, I mean, like I say, you can watch a lot of the tourist type videos on the house to get an idea of the layout. It was a very nice house. But one of the things I found that when I was starting to research this, and I think was it 2019 you investigated?
Correct.
Yeah. A few years before that, they'd actually moved the house from its original location, hadn't they, by floating it across the lake.
Correct. So just to digress a little bit through the history of the house. So we're talking about the house. The interesting thing to us is that our grandparents actually lived about 4 miles from this house. So when we were growing up, we would go by the house and we would go by the property on the way to the post office. And my Nana would always say that's where the Barker gang was killed. So we've always had a fascination with this location. And so to be able to investigate it to us was really a dream come true. But to your point, so what happened after the shootout, again, Carson Bradford, the original owner of the house, he never intended this to be a vacation home. And then we get to 1935, it ends up being a shootout. So for about 3 months, the national spotlight was on this house and was on Ocklawaha, Florida. But the Carson Bradford actually had the presence of mind to preserve the house as it was in 1935. So when you walk into the house currently, there are bullet holes in the wall. There are bullet holes in the furniture. The sconces are original. The hardwood is original. The paint is original. Everything is as it is for the most part, as it was in 1935. So in 2016, the family decided, it had been in the family since that time, but in 2016, the descendants decided that they wanted to sell the land. They wanted no longer to have ownership of it. So they decided to sell it, and the new owners did not want the house. They wanted to demolish the house and put up their own house on the land. And so Marion County said, don't destroy it because it is history. Let us take control of it and we will move it off the land for you. And And so the new owners agreed. And so they basically just picked the house up. They put it on a barge in Lake Weir, and they floated it about 2 miles across the lake to the location where it's sitting now. It's sitting on about 40 acres by itself, and the county has plans to revamp it, the area, to make it look like it did in 1935.
So is it still by the lake? So it's still got the water?
Correct. Correct. So the county picked a spot in this park. It's called Carney Island Park. They picked a spot in this park that looked almost exactly like the original shootout property. Right. And so one of the FBI in 1935, one of the FBI agents that was involved in the shootout just had a very, very detailed map of everything that was going on that day. So he drew on this piece of paper, and you can view it online. Mm-hmm. You see the house, you see where every FBI agent was in relation to the house. You see where the trees were, the barn was, where the caretaker's house was. So what the county is going to do is they're going to take that map, and they're going to, as accurately as they can, put that land back to what it was in 1935. They're going to make it look exactly like the shootout location. So they're going to plant the same trees. They're going to plant the same bushes. They're going to put up a little barn, a little chicken barn, which was by the house. So it's going to look exactly like the original shootout property, only it's 2 miles away.
And you mentioned the caretaker. That was one thing we didn't say when we were talking about the shootout, that they thought the shooting had finished. The FBI didn't go in first to check that it was clear.
No, there was a caretaker of the property. His name was Willie Woodbury. And so the FBI thought that once the shooting had died, they let the shooting, there was a lull in the shooting for about 45 minutes. So they suspected that the occupants of the house, again, they did not know that it was just Ma and Fred. No. They thought it was actually other people in the house as well. So what the theory is that the gangsters would not shoot somebody that they knew. So Willie Woodbury was somebody that they knew because he was the caretaker of the place. So they put a bulletproof vest on Willie Woodbury and said, "You go in the door." So he went into the door, he went upstairs, and he yelled that they were both dead. And that's when the FBI went into the house after that.
You got a feel for him, though. It was almost like he was a sacrificial lamb. If they hadn't.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, they didn't care. Yeah, they didn't care about him. They just didn't want to lose one of their own.
No. Anyway, so we've got this amazing house, and honestly, I do stress, have a look at the video. It really is a good video. But what kind of blew me away was when I started listening to your investigation and talking to you before we came on air. You were saying that they don't allow investigators in. You know, it's kind of and it was your professionalism that made them think, well, actually, this might be a good thing to find out. And the EVPs. Was it Jenny who was with you on these investigations?
Correct. So what we did was, and to your point, you're absolutely right. They initially did not allow paranormal investigators into this location. You know, a lot of people don't subscribe to the fact that there are hauntings and that some of these houses could have, paranormal activity. Yeah. So that was really not on their radar. But because I've known about this house since I was born, you know, this is really one that when I found out the county owned it, I really wanted to get into this house to do an investigation. So I approached the county. It's now owned by the Park and Rec department there. So I approached the county and I asked if they would allow us to do an investigation, and they graciously allowed us to do so. They basically gave us free reign of the house to do what we wanted to do to see if we could find any paranormal activity. So what we did is I wanted to get into the house on the anniversary of the shootout. Yeah. So the shootout happened on January 16th, 1935. So what we did is in 2019, we went in on the night of January 15th and we set up stationary equipment. So night vision video cameras, voice recorders, some trigger items that we left inside the house. And then we left that to run on its own. So we walked out of the house, we locked the door. We had complete control of the environment because there is no power to the house. There's no water to the house. We had outdoor cameras, so we knew that no animal life like deer or bear approached the house during the night. So we had complete control of the environment. So when we left those stationary night vision video cameras and voice recorders to run until about 10 a.m. on January 16th, which would have encompassed the hours of the shootout. We went back and we listened to the equipment that we had that night, and we watched the video. To your point, we captured some compelling evidence that we can't explain. So, for example, we were hearing what we felt were chairs being dragged across the floor. We heard what sounded to us like doors slamming. We captured what to us sounded like a male's voice saying, "Get out." And two EVPs that we captured that are very compelling actually occurred in the room where Ma and Fred's body was found, and we call it the kill room. So when we listened to the voice recorder from the kill room, we captured two EVPs. The first one said, "Freddie." The second one said, "Yeah, Ma." The next one said, "Get ready." And to us, that was, this a sign of possibly something residual, because I do feel that that's probably what they said on January 16th, 1935. So to me, those are residual EVPs. And so after that, we went in about 2 weeks later, we went in and actually stayed the night in the house. So just Jenny and I went to the house and we stayed the night there, and we tried several different experiments. We did some EVP sessions, but one of the most compelling things that we did is we had a spirit box. And for those listeners that don't know what that is, it's a small AM/FM radio that's been modified to very quickly sweep through frequencies. So when you turn it on and you start sweeping, it sounds like as it's going through all these frequencies. So the idea is that spirits can use the white noise between the frequencies to communicate with us. And again, as I said before, this house is sitting alone on about 40 acres. Ocklawaha does not have a radio station or a television station. And so there's no way that this small radio could be picking up anything outside of its immediate range. So we took that spirit box up to the kill room, and when we set it down, we started asking questions. And one of the things that came across was, "Someone's up here." And that was the first thing that it said, which is compelling because theoretically you should not hear a phrase on that spirit box. So when it said "someone's up here," that's completely compelling to us. And then I said, "Can you say the name Blackburn?" And through the spirit box came the name Blackburn. And I said, "What happened in this room?" And it said, "They murdered us. We the ones dead," which again is extremely compelling evidence for us.
So how do you think, or do you think the house was affected by being moved? Because this is one of the interesting things, isn't it? It's one of the conversations I've had with people is, you can go into a very, very modern building, say a house in the UK that maybe was only built in 1990, and it can be haunted, have activity, I should say. And people will go, "Well, how can it have activities? It was only built in 1990. And you'll say, "Well, look at what was on the ground beforehand." And a lot of the time, you can find a link to what was there as opposed to what is there now. I mean, there are other reasons that a person brought something in with them. It could be an item that is attached to, there's a whole myriad of reasons, but that is one of them. Always look at what was on the land beforehand. The fact that the Barker house was moved.
Correct.
Has there ever been any accounts of where it was moved from? Having anything going?
No.
Do you get what I'm asking?
I do get what you're asking. Why is the house haunted and not the land? And why didn't they stay with the land? And my question, because I do get that question a lot, my answer to that is they had no ties to the land. Remember, they were nomadic in life. They traveled across the country essentially as their profession. So they had no home base. So this house was essentially their last, it was not essentially, it was their last hideout, and it happened to be the one that they were killed in. So they had no connection to the land, but they darn sure had a connection to the house because they were killed there. So I firmly believe that those spirits moved with the house rather than stay with the land, because the land wasn't the important part, the house was. So their spirits, I do believe, are encompassed in the walls of that house. And I believe they're actually, pretty active. After we did the investigation, I actually volunteered for a time with the county to be a docent. And so I would lead day tours through the house, and I would give the story of what happened. And so I would go there and unlock the doors and stuff before the tour group got there. And I would routinely hear, footsteps. And I would go in and say, "Hey, Ma, hey, Freddie, Hope you're doing all right today, because I do think their spirits, you can actually feel their presence in that house. And I do believe it's because they had such strong personalities in life. And so for me, they stayed with the house rather than the land, because there was no ties to the land.
Plus, it's a beautiful area. It looks beautiful. I mean, if you're gonna spend eternity somewhere, spend it somewhere beautiful.
Right.
I mean, being a bit sort of flippant about it, but when you, I mean, I've listened to the EVPs that you put on, and I think they're pretty compelling. I mean, I wrote down that I think you were using the spirit box, and you got someone's up here, can't see him. Fred, that was Kate, and then they repeat the word Blackburn. And I had with the Get Out EVP that was caught both on the voice recorder and on the night camera, I believe.
The camera, correct? Yeah.
I'd actually written down, was anyone else on the ground? Could it have been picked up externally? But as you've said, it is literally in the middle of nowhere. But that Get Out sounded a different voice to the male voice that came through.
You mean from the spirit box? It really kind of just depends. One of those, like you said, was captured on the voice recorder, and the other was captured on the night vision video camera, which you've got to take into account that they have two different microphones and two different recording systems.
Those ones sounded the same to me. I was comparing it to the male voice that would come through on the spirit box, and that would have been in effect recorded on the camera, because you were recording the box, and I can hear it's the same male voice every time.
Honestly, I believe it is the same male voice that we captured. I think that there's one dominant male presence, and I do believe that's Fred. I honestly believe that Barker Karpis may be there as well, but not as a steady presence. He did visit occasionally, and he was very close with Ma. Ma considered him almost as close as one of her sons. So they had a very strong connection. So if you watch the video as well, we did a spirit box session in the living room, and I said, "Can you say the name Alvin?" And the name Alvin and then Karpis came up on the spirit box as well. So I do believe that Alvin is there. But yeah, back to your point, I do believe that there's one male dominant presence, and that would be Fred.
Yeah. I just thought I wondered if it was a different another male who was yelling to get out, or whether it was, because there does seem to be as well with the EVP evidence. Some of it, as you say, sounded residual, like the get ready one. But then also the fact that you get someone's up here, I can't see them, when you and Jenny are in the room, was quite sort of like, that's interesting. It's almost like they are talking to each other and saying, there's someone in here. Well, I can't see him. And yeah, it was. But does it feel threatening in there?
No, I've never felt threatened. And like I said, I've spent hours in there by myself. I've never felt threatened. I do feel that their strong presence, and to be honest with you, and we actually do this with all the investigations that we go to, one of the recurring themes of our investigations is we always say we want to tell your story. Will you allow us to tell your story? Because we feel that is legitimately what we want to do. We want to tell the history of the location, and then if any spirit wants to tell its story to us, that's our job to convey that story. And so when they told us on the spirit box they murdered us, we the ones dead, that to me is their story. Yes, they were killed by the FBI, but in their eyes, they were murdered by the FBI. And so that's the story that we wanted to tell. And I think because of that, I think we get a little bit, and this is just me personally, I think there was a little bit of a respect level there, because I was approaching them as, I'm not here to make money off you. I'm not here to take money from you, or to judge or put you in a different light. I legitimately want to know what happened here. And so for that, I think when we walk in, I've never felt threatened there. I just think that they're very strong presence, but not anything that's threatening, just saying, hey, I'm here.
Yeah. So do you ever get other people to listen to your EVPs who don't know where it's come from? So they're almost listening to them out of context. So, if you were listening to something where somebody called Ma Barker and Fred died, you might be listening for those names. But do you ever get people who do not have a clue where you've been and just say, listen to this, what do you hear?
Yes. And most of the time it's my mom and dad. I'll just say, hey, can you take a listen to this? I just, because they know we go on investigations all the time and not necessarily where. So I'll say, hey, I'll send it to my mom. Just say, hey, take a listen to this and see what you think. Or I'll send it to my dad. Hey, take a listen to this and tell me what you hear. And because, I do think that our family is kind of like a microcosm of our audience and to get their opinion on it. So, yes, I do have those people who don't know where the recordings are coming from. And we also listen to them as well to try to get a consensus. And even and not just on this investigation, on all of our investigations, no matter what we perceive that we captured, I will always cross-reference where everybody's at in the investigation, what is going on in the environment during that time, and what is left are the things that I can't explain. And so that, not that I want to say it was easy, but it was easier at the Barker house because, like I said, we had complete control of the environment. Only 4 people know really where the key would be. Only a handful of people knew where actually the house was, because it was kind of segregated in this park, and because for security reasons they did not want a lot of people in the public to know where it was. So, and you need a 4-wheel drive vehicle to get back to it because of the Florida sand. So it is really isolated, and like I said, because we had control of everything, that's what makes it so much more compelling.
Plus, also, when if you haven't heard the Spirit Box communications, it's hard to sort of convince people, but the voices you hear communicating are the same voice. They're 2 voices, but it's the same female voice. You can hear the intonation in her voice and the same male voice. It would be very, very hard to fake that through a Spirit Box. Correct. You would have to have some kind of, I don't know. Actually, I don't know how you do it. I'm not a radio tech, but all I know is as you say, and you can hear it sweeping. And this is when what we're trying to explain is that it sweeps so fast. It's like 200 times a minute or something.
Yeah, I think it's like,
you can get up to about 300
a second or something is right.
So to get the same voice, giving a multi-syllable, legible sentence. It's
nearly impossible. It is impossible because you would essentially have to get, dozens of radio stations to line up where it would say someone's up here or they killed us, we the ones dead. And the odds of that are astronomical. And again, because it said Blackburn, the moment I asked it to say Blackburn, again, there in my mind, there's no radio station or television station or anything that would be saying Blackburn in the vicinity of the house the moment I'm asking it to say Blackburn. And, a lot of people could question the Spirit Box and that's fine. I completely...
You should always question things. Yeah,
exactly. I completely understand why people would say that this isn't a valid tool. But when you couple that with the noises that we got and the EVPs that we got and the other pieces of evidence, when you start lining these up, it just builds a stronger case for us. When I go to the Ma Barker house or to any of these locations, I will never say that it's 100% haunted, that I am an expert in this and I am telling you that it's haunted. I will never say that. I will say at this moment in time, when we controlled for the environmental factors such as light and noise and the other outside influences, the things that I am left with are to me compelling and I can't explain them. Now, if somebody wants to come to me and say, hey, I think it could be this, then I absolutely want to have that dialogue because I would love to know where this is coming from if it's not paranormal, because then that's another thing that I never control for. But what I'm saying on this Ma Barker one and all of our investigations, these are the things that when we take everything else out that I can account for, these are left and I can't explain them. And so that's what I'm putting forth as our evidence. Am I going to say that I'm an expert? No, because I don't think anybody's an expert in this field. But that's what we were left with when we did this investigation.
Yeah, the thing is, it's like you say, you can have experience, experience stuff, but there's no such thing as an expert because nobody can say they know categorically this is the right answer. And it's also, as we were talking about this off air, weren't we? Paranormal doesn't have to mean ghost.
Correct.
Paranormal just means I can't explain it. It's not normal.
And absolutely.
and having that kind of communication. I mean, you know, I remember I had a 3-hour conversation with Nick Groff about this last year. And we were saying how we go through all the different things, and the fact it could even be the fact that because time isn't linear, somehow you're stepping back in time and hearing something that happened in time because you're and all these kind of wonderful explanations that are all fascinating. And everyone should ask questions. Don't ever take it at face value. If you've got a theory as to what it could be, tell someone.
Absolutely.
But also have the politeness and the manners when that person says, well, actually, we have considered this, but this is why. You know, but that two-way dialogue is the only way this field is ever going to keep, it's going to progress and learn.
Exactly. And, you know, again, not to disparage anybody out there that would profess to be an expert, but I would totally disagree that there is the possibility to be an expert in this field when all we're doing is dealing with theory. You know, your theory is different than my theory, or, you know, my theory could line up with somebody else. But, you know, the cool thing about what we do is I can investigate the Ma Barker house tonight, and you can investigate the Ma Barker house tomorrow night.
Oh, please.
And we will never, ever get the same evidence, ever. My evidence will be unique to my situation and my investigation. Now, you may get something similar. You may get the same EVP, but or the same male sounding voice. Yeah. But that's what's so great about it. You know, when you're dealing with something concrete, like, say, gravity, I know that when I drop this apple, it's going to fall. When you drop the apple, it's going to fall. But when we go to these investigations, we don't know what we're going to get, and it's different every single time. So no group, no matter what your investigation style, is going to get the same exact stuff that I'm going to get. So there's no reason for me to be, you know, thumping my chest saying that I have the end all be all, because I don't. You know, everything is going to be different. And we, as you, to your point, you know, we're all growing and learning in this field, and there's no way that anybody's going to be an expert, because there's no concrete one right answer.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we're all growing. And you're 100% right. I agree with you completely. You can be an expert in different component parts of things, like an expert in photography, or an expert in radio waves, or an expert in history, but you can't say you're an expert in the paranormal, or you're an expert in ghost hunting, or whatever your terminology for it is, because there's no proven thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I was on a podcast a couple of days ago when somebody asked me, you know, what in your mind is the greatest piece of paranormal evidence? And to me, that is such a subjective question, because, you know, what I think is a fantastic piece of evidence, say, you know, the EVP at Ma Barker, somebody else may say that's not, to me, that's not a great piece of evidence, but this is. So what's the level of, you know, of rightness of, you know, what's a better EVP? There isn't one. What's a better shadow figure? There isn't one. You know, so it is just a fascinating field to be involved in, because we're always looking at different things in different ways.
Definitely. But before we finish, do you think Ma Barker, because when Karpis was actually arrested, one of the things he said is Barker wasn't the woman everyone painted her out to be. She wasn't public enemy number one. She was just a slightly naive mother. I'm putting words in his mouth, but I'm kind of paraphrasing what he said, that she was basically a very, very protective, slightly naive mum who enjoyed the trappings of being part of a crime family, a gangster family, but she didn't organise anything. She didn't even know how to fire a gun. And then people have started to say, because, you know, one of the things we didn't mention is that when the bodies were taken out, Fred was riddled with bullets. They're not sure which was the kill shot, yet there was one bullet that they confirmed was what killed Ma. And one of the theories is that when they knew they were about to get, they were losing, shall we say, that Fred killed Ma and then waited to die himself. And that basically Ma was a victim of Hoover, of J. Edgar Hoover, that he wanted to prove how amazing he was. And I mean, you know, he was in charge of the FBI for a very long time, and he you know, he wanted to prove how amazing he was. He wanted to endear himself to the president. So he made something out of Ma that she never was. What are your thoughts on that?
You're absolutely right. There are so many theories involving this, from the trajectory of some of the bullet holes in the room and in the house, that are linear rather than an upward motion where a bullet would be coming from if you're shooting from the ground. So there are a lot of theories around this. And to your point, J. Edgar Hoover really was after Ma and the Barker Karpis gang, because this was essentially the last big gang that he needed to take down, right? He's already taken down Al Capone. He's already taken down Dillinger, Babyface Nelson. And so this really was the last hurrah for the gangster era, was the Barker Karpis gang. So she was public enemy number one. However, my theory behind it is, and I'll go back to the day of the shootout, you don't learn to shoot a Tommy gun on the day you're going to die. You don't learn to shoot a handgun on the day you're going to die. She knew how to fire those guns and use that weaponry. So I think that she had a hand in the gang. I don't think she did a lot of the planning, but I think she absolutely knew what they were doing. She reaped the benefits of the money that they stole and the ransoms that they received. She was living the high life based on what they were doing. So, the theory that J. Edgar Hoover really painted her to be this monster when she wasn't, I do think it was exaggerated. Of course, if you have the media spotlight, you absolutely can exaggerate that, but going back to the day of the shootout, I just don't think it's possible that you learn how to shoot those things and take those actions if you already haven't done it. And so in my mind, I do think that she that she knew what she was doing and what was going on with the gang.
Fascinating. It does sound like an amazing. Hopefully, if I ever get over to Florida, they'll have started doing some of the developments on it so I can actually visit it
absolutely.
And experience it. And although I'm a bit scared of the thought of alligators, so is Joe still in that lake?
No, Big Joe has been captured. He was captured after that, okay. or killed after that. But no, listen, alligators are fine. I've dealt with alligators my entire life. So we'll take care of the alligators, and okay. You just come down here and we'll do some cool paranormal investigations.
Yeah, I don't mind chatting to Ma and Fred. That doesn't bother me. But the thought of doing battle with an alligator, no. So what have you got? What have Soul Sisters got coming up? What are you up to at the moment?
We've actually got a pretty big 2021 coming out, even with the pandemic and stuff that's going on. Jenny and I will be traveling to Texas in 2 weeks. We'll be stopping at the Myrtles Plantation and doing a brief investigation there. And then we're heading off to Mineral Wells, Texas to spend the weekend at the Old Nazareth Hospital. So we have that cool investigation. We've got a couple of symposiums that we'll be taking part in. There's a symposium at Arkansas State University where I'll be speaking. We've got a couple of Paracons we will be speaking as well. And then, we'll be hopefully over in England in September also.
Hopefully we'll get to meet face to face.
Yes, that'd be a lot of fun.
I'm only 5'2" and you're about 5'9". I may have to stand on a chair, so we meet face to face, but it'll work. Bosworth Hall with the Festival of the Unexplained.
Yes, so I'll be over there actually kind of helping Miranda, Ghost Biker Explorations, with her talk and her presentation. So I'll be over there kind of working Ghost Biker management, if you will. But hopefully I'll be able to get some investigations in as well.
Well, I'm sure I know that the history tours that hopefully I'll be doing on the Friday, we're waiting for confirmation on the two of them, and they should be interesting. So how can people find out what you guys are up to, follow you, contact you, ask you questions? How do they go about doing it?
Everything about us is on our website at www.soulsistersparanormal.com. And we're also very prolific on Facebook under Soul Sisters Paranormal. We have a YouTube channel as well under Soul Sisters Paranormal. So everything that we do video-wise is there. If you want to contact us, I'd suggest the website, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Wonderful. Well, do make sure your next video you share to Haunted Histories Facebook page so we can get some of the Haunted Histories followers to subscribe as well.
Thank you.
So that's been the lovely Kristy. I was really looking forward to this one because I'd seen the history work that she does on her YouTube videos and everything else. So it was I had to up my game even more so that I could keep up with you.
No, this was a lot of fun. And Penny, thank you so much for having me on.
You're very, very welcome. Well, you've been listening to Haunted Histories. Yep, it's Penny, Haunted Histories, Paranormal UK Radio. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the show. There will be another one in 2 weeks' time. But on that note, have a good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.